Yeah, so I think too, I'll start off by saying, even at the Western Journal today, we were all discussing this, and we realized just kind of how complicated this is, because there's a lot of conservative commentators across the board, but as we were looking at this case, we kind of realized that there's just this disconnect with how people are discussing the shooting overall. So
you're talking about the shooting that happened earlier this weekend. It was not a mass shooting. It was one student killing a bully.
It was on Wednesday morning. So
shooting a bully, pardon me.
So here's kind of the key facts, so going into this, like what went on. So the first thing is that this young man, he was 18 years old, Timothy Simpkins. He's 18 years old at Timberview High School in Arlington, Texas. And one teacher was injured in the fight. He went to break up the fight that was going on and ended up getting shot. As far as I know, no one has passed away as of right now. I think people are in intensive care. And another person had their arm grazed by a bullet, and another teacher fell in a stampede and was harmed there. The thing that we have to realize is that this young man went specifically after one student and shot him 4 times, and he is in critical condition at the hospital right now. The family has come out and said that this was a targeted, kind of a more targeted issue because...
a defensive shooting.
Because they claim that he was being robbed at school. And so just for some reference points to who Timothy was at school, is apparently he lives in a $400,000 home with his grandmother, and he drives a $35,000 Dodge Challenger. So he kind of was maybe more of a financial target. Now, here's the thing that everyone agrees with on the conservative right, is that the fact that this kid got out of jail in less than 24 hours after having a shooting incident where he intended to kill someone is pretty crazy when it comes to bail. So I think that is kind of a more topical issue. And my question for you guys is because he obviously had to make the bail, does this shooting topic become more of an economic issue first and foremost?
Yeah, before we did this, I looked into some of the demographics in Arlington, Texas, and I tried looking at the school. School A- on niche has a C+ in safety. That is the one category that they are not doing well in. So clearly, this school might have certain issues in terms of safety just in general. Then more specifically with the community of Arlington, at first I was a little bit kind of confused about the economic aspect. So looking a little bit closer, this is kind of more of your typical middle class suburb, pretty much.
Of Dallas.
Yeah. So there were certain things like that, but I think what was so interesting about this was the fact that the family was saying that, you know how they always say this, it's like, oh, he was such a nice kid, it's like we would never assume anything that this would happen. So with that in mind, clearly there was money somewhere to just pull out a $75,000 bail, or at least get approved for like, I don't know, like a loan.
It was a bail bondsman who put it up.
So like there are certain things like with that aren't just kind of.
But $75,000 for shooting a kid in a school, and it wasn't keep going. Yeah,
like something is just not adding up here with all of this, and I think the thing that confuses me the most is how much the family is standing by him. Like, that sounds bad, but it honestly...
it doesn't sound bad.
Like, 4 people are injured.
It is weird. It is.
And this is not adding up to me, and I would almost be curious to... I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on, then I'm going to take it right off. Tinfoil hat. How much did the family know about this if this was going to happen, if they had any clue about this? I'd be curious to know that. Tinfoil hat coming off with that in mind, but... I'd be curious to see more future investigations, what more details come out about this, particularly with the bullying. And I know there was a detail somewhere that he was made fun of for like wearing like higher end clothing.
Yep.
So there's clearly some financial
issues.
Jealousy, something.
So one thing that's interesting about this, it's kind of the other side of the news clip that we have seen so many times. You see a news clip where they're interviewing the mother of normally a young man who's been killed in a drug deal or something like that. And the comment is always, oh, it wasn't his fault. He just got in with a bad crowd. He wasn't to blame at all. This is kind of the flip side of that, where now the kid is the shooter, alleged shooter. And there's, it's not his fault. It was a defensive shooting. It's not his fault. And so part of me wonders if this is just more of the abdication of responsibility and accountability in the culture, that you're just supposed to be able to do whatever you want, and it's always someone else's fault.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've hit on some like really interesting topics here, but I think that this has been misreported in two ways, and one of the ways we've already talked about, but the first way is that this was not self-defense. He walked up to this kid who was supposedly bullying him, shot him in the back 4 times, and then ended up shooting a teacher and grazing someone with a bullet. This was a targeted shooting. And so we can't just say that this was self-defense, because in no right mind can you tell me that walking up to someone and shooting them is self-defense. It's not as if this kid was being attacked at the time.
Yeah, this was minutes after, wasn't it?
This was like minutes after, yeah. So there was a time period where there was time to cool off, there was nothing going on, like they had previously fought. This is not this self-defensive shooting, and the media is covering it like that. So that's kind of the fault of the mainstream media. Now let's talk kind of maybe about what the conservative media has done, because I think that it would be wrong to kind of hop on one of the bandwagons that some conservatives are jumping on, which is that conservatives are getting excited because this kind of diminishes the white school shooter narrative. And so people are pointing at it and going, hey, look at this. Like this we can look at because we have Parkland, we have Sandy Hook, we have Columbine, and we can say, hey, look, it's not just a white student anymore. But the key issue with this is, with the facts we've already given you, is that this was not killing for killing. This wasn't the Parkland shooter walking into Parkland seeing how many children he could kill. This was a targeted attack. And so I think it would be wrong for us to say, oh, this breaks the left's narrative, because it's not factually accurate. And off of that, we have to be careful in how we talk about these shootings, because every time there is a mass shooting, like Las Vegas, for example, that shooting, that gets rerouted into a new narrative on gun safety in America, whether or not people should be able to buy guns, whether or not guns should be allowed, and whether or not the Second Amendment should be allowed to stand. And so I think we have to be really, really careful here. And I know, Josh, you and I were talking about this earlier.
Yeah, we were. I think one of the interesting things here, I think you're exactly right. There are lots of people who are sick of hearing the leftist narrative, that it's only ever white people who are mass shooters. Well, it turns out in a lot of cases it really is white people who are mass shooters. But I think there's a reason for that. And the reason is really good for all of us to recognize. What has essentially happened in America is we have an enormous amount of wealth. We have an incredible amount of relative safety. Disease is more or less essentially beaten. There are still things we haven't figured out how to beat, like COVID for one thing, but it's not the enormous threat people thought it was. It is a big threat, but it's not that big. We haven't figured out how to deal with cancer yet. We haven't figured out diabetes, but we're unlocking these things, and more. There's not a lot to work toward or be afraid of. And what happens in that scenario, and then the other piece of it is that through secularism, we've seen faith deteriorate. And so what happens then is you have kids who are growing up who really don't have anything to fight for. They don't have anything to live for. They don't have any cause. And so being empty, they begin to be possessed by nihilism, and then they feel that life is nothing but pain, and then they want to inflict that pain on other people. I think that's why you actually see more white people doing this than you do black people, because whether or not it's true, there is a sense in the black community that equality has not been reached, and they are still fighting for that. They still have a reason to exist, whereas postmodernism and post-Christianity has essentially hollowed out any reason that Americans have to exist, that white people have to exist in a lot of ways. And I think that's why you see more of these mass shooters coming from the white population than from other populations.